For England and Wales at the moment, we've got this weather front sinking south. That's providing a lot of cloud and some drizzly conditions over the Midlands, South Wales and South West England through the evening. A bit of patchy rain later tonight for East Anglia and the South East. But behind that, clearer skies will bring a chill first thing. Temperatures down to 2 or 3 degrees. That's in towns and cities. Add on that wind and it really will feel pretty raw on Thursday morning. But generally, it's a fine and sunny start. Now, through the day tomorrow, there will be some showers grazing the east coast of England, at times Pembrokeshire, Cornwall too, the eastern side of Northern Ireland. The showers in northern Scotland falling as snow over the hills, hail likely down to lower levels, and the wind's slowly easing here, but nevertheless a cold wind blowing for much of the day. Temperatures only 6 or 7 for most places. Add on that wind, it feels even colder. Things turning pretty cold pretty quickly on Thursday evening, but up to the north we're going to see wet weather pushing in. Some snow on the hills, and this zone of rain will slip its way steadily southwards during Friday. A lot of cloud around, outbreaks of rain, and increasingly windy. And increasingly, the showers turning back to snow over northern Scotland. So, a cause for concern as this weather turns very lively through Friday and Saturday. Low pressure heading through the North Sea. Look at those isobars pinching together. A Met Office wind warning in place across northern Britain on Friday, and more widely across the UK on Saturday. Gust of wind 50-60 miles an hour inland, stronger than that on the coast, could cause some disruption. If you're travelling on Friday or Saturday, keep up to date with the forecast.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Hello there, coming up on this episode of Brazier, why today's horrifying events in the Channel mustn't be weaponised by those who refuse to lay the lion's share of the blame at the feet of people smugglers. I'll speak to a former Home Office advisor. Also tonight, in the last few minutes, it's been reported that another separate rescue operation is underway in the Channel with bodies in the water. I'll talk live to our home editor, Mark White, who's been in Dover all day. Also coming up, why another great northern city joins the grubby roll call of grooming gangs. I'll be joined by Maggie Oliver, the detective turned whistleblower who told the truth about abuse in Rochdale.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And lift.
And I'll be joined from the US by a space expert who thinks that today's NASA launch gives mankind a realistic chance of stopping a planet-killing asteroid. Also, on what would have been the 215th birthday of William Webb Ellis, the man who invented rugby, I'll be joined by a former Welsh international who fears ex-players face an epidemic of problems caused by concussion. All that's coming up, but first a news update with Tamsin.
Thank you, Colin. Good evening. Here are the latest headlines. The Prime Minister says he's shocked, appalled and deeply saddened following the deaths of at least 30 migrants trying to cross the English Channel. The drownings come as British authorities continue to intercept an increasing number of boats. Recent figures show more than 25,700 people have reached the UK this year, 3 times more than all of 2020. After chairing an emergency Cobra meeting, Boris Johnson admitted not enough is being done to stem the flow of migrants crossing the Channel.
I just want to say that I'm shocked and appalled and deeply saddened by the loss of life at sea in the Channel. My thoughts and sympathies are, first of all, with the victims and their families. And it's an appalling thing that they have suffered. Also shows how vital it is that we now step up our efforts to break the business model of the gangsters who are sending people to sea in this way.
A man has been charged with the murders of a couple who were killed in Somerset. Stephen and Jennifer Chappell were stabbed to death in their home while their 2 young sons were asleep upstairs. 34-year-old Colin Reeves is due to appear at Taunton Magistrates Court tomorrow. Emergency services are warning people to keep their windows and doors closed following a huge fire in East Yorkshire. Footage posted on social media shows flames burning near residential properties. A large plume of smoke was also seen billowing over the town of Hessle. Fire crews are battling to get the blaze under control. 2 police officers who shared crime scene photos describing the victims as dead birds have been sacked. Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman were killed in northwest London in June last year. PC Jamie Lewis and Dennis Jaffa, who strayed from the cordon to take photos, admitted posting them on WhatsApp. A tribunal found them guilty of gross misconduct, describing their actions as shameful. Offenders who kill an emergency service worker while they're on duty will be given mandatory life jail sentences. The change in law follows a 2-year campaign by Lizzie Harper, whose husband, police officer Andrew, was killed while responding to a late-night burglary call. 3 teenagers were cleared of murder but convicted of manslaughter. And it's the shortest ever stint as Prime Minister. But Sweden's first female in the role has quit just hours after being selected. Magdalena Andersson resigned after suffering a budget defeat in Parliament. Well, you're right up to date. Now it's back to Colin.
Well, we do not yet know the full horrifying details of what happened in the Channel today, what may still be going on, in fact, but the headlines are stark and depressing. More than 30 migrants have perished, drowned in the icy late November waters of the world's busiest shipping lanes. We may never know their names or nationalities, not least because many of these desperate souls destroy any documentation that might subsequently identify them to Britain's hard-pressed immigration authorities. But we do know where the blame lies. Those in the first circle of this hellish story are the people smugglers, the criminals who are part of an international network that sells an idea of easy access to the West. They prey on people who want a better life, often drawn by a diaspora that has already settled in Britain and with whom they are in regular contact. The people smugglers are the villains of this piece. They ought to be reviled, but because we'll never find out who they are, what they look like, where they live, they will escape the vitriol that is about to be directed, in their absence, at others. The traffickers deserve the lion's share of the blame, but the French authorities are heavily culpable too. Only this week they rejected a British offer to send officers from the UK to help patrol French beaches. Paris has recently seemed happy for the land around Calais and Dunkirk to become a marshalling yard for people smugglers. Our Home Secretary has told the French that the easier they make it to get to Britain, the more migrants will come. For whatever reason, some think even as punishment for Brexit, the French have ignored the logic of Priti Patel's argument and, in doing so, have shown criminal neglect. But today's tragedy has already been weaponised by those for whom there is only one answer to the question of what to do about migrants crossing the Channel: to legalise their journeys, to legitimise what hitherto has been outlawed, and to leverage the emotive events of today for ideological advantage. And so it is tonight that we have a succession of lobby groups, NGOs, and politically aligned charities lining up not to blame the smuggling gangs or even French inertia, but to lambaste the British government. For instance, Detention Action said, "It is this government's failures that have allowed this current crisis." No, no, no. It is the venality of people smugglers and the indifference of the French that have brought us to today's body count. Another NGO, this time the Refugee Council, offered this analysis. Every day, people are forced to flee their home through no fault of their own. Now is the time to end the cruel and ineffective tactic of seeking to punish or push away those who try and find safety in our country. Safety in our country? If there is one thing that's become clear in recent years, it is that many of those who come to Britain illegally have done so by travelling through countries where they could, if they wished, claim asylum and find safety. But already organisations which effectively champion open borders say this tragedy should make the government scrap new legislation which, though imperfect, offers half a chance of stemming the current record-breaking flow of migrants. Care for Calais tweeted, "On behalf of those who've died, we again urge the government to scrap its anti-refugee bill and introduce a fair, modern system now. For humanity's sake, please." These organisations are run by people who have a laudable desire to help their fellow human beings, but they are now behaving as if the government hadn't spent the last year warning that what's happened today would happen. They mustn't be allowed to shift blame from where it ought to be heaped, most forcefully. It's virtually impossible legally to hold the people smugglers to account for what's happened in the Channel today. It's almost as impossible diplomatically to make the French shoulder their share of the authorship of this tragedy. It's easier to blame those we know. Easier, but it's not fair. This government has made mistakes over immigration, many mistakes, but most of those mistakes were sins of omission, not commission. If we'd been tougher, not softer, we might have deterred the reckless actions of people who were duped into thinking they could safely reach the country of their dreams. Tonight, as their lifeless bodies are being hauled from the Channel, we should resist the lazy assumptions of those who think that any death can be nobody's fault but ours. That's tonight's Brazier Angle. Well, let's turn to our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White, who joins me now, who's been in the Channel and is now joining us from Dover with the latest on this, Mark. There is an update. There may still be an operation happening right now.
Yes, another rescue operation underway. The Ramsgate lifeboat has been launched to go to assist French maritime services as they deal with an incident just on the French side of the Channel in an area called Sandetti Bank. That is not far from where this boat capsized earlier today, killing 30+ people. Now, there are reports of people in the water there. The one warning I would give to this is that, sadly, every day there are reports of migrants in the water, migrant boats sinking or capsized, because simply passing boats will see empty vessels, empty inflatable boats that are out there in the Channel that have been abandoned by the likes of Border Force because they've got too many of these small boats to tow back to Dover, so they have to leave some of them in the Channel. There's also the people smugglers themselves who arm the migrants with the ways in which to ensure that they are properly picked up by British authorities, and that's often to dial 999 and say that the boat is sinking or that someone is in the water or suffering from hypothermia. That is indeed what we saw today, actually, as I was out in the Channel with our colleague Nigel Farage, because we knew it was going to be another significant day of migrant crossings. It had been a few days of really bad weather and people just stacking up on the French side of the Channel waiting to come across. So as the weather improved, and remember, of course, it's never brilliant in the Channel, but it improved enough to allow boat after boat to kick off from the French beaches to try to make that perilous journey. And we caught up with one particular boat that came from the very beaches where that tragic boat journey began a few hours ago, that ended with that boat capsizing and 30 plus people having died. This is a look back at the day we had in the Channel. Heading out into the Channel shipping lanes at the start of a day which would end in terrible tragedy for a migrant boat that left the shores of Calais. This is the story of our day on the Channel, an encounter with another boat out of Calais, one which did make it safely to the UK. And by daylight, as Border Force and lifeboats are already responding to numerous sightings, we spot this small boat crossing into British waters. 22, mainly men on board, with a couple of women and a small child. They tell us they're from Iraq and Iran, that they set off from Calais at 5 a.m. Now they've reached UK waters, the people smugglers will have told them it's just a matter of being picked up by British authorities. Well, as they saw us approaching, those on board this boat cut their engine in the hope, obviously, of being picked up by Border Force and the RNLI. The difficulty is that both Border Force and the lifeboats are some distance away dealing with other incidents, so it's likely to be some time before they get here and reach these people. Those on board showed us a small child who they said was suffering from exposure to the cold. The boat skipper radioed those concerns to the Coast Guard.
It's my blanket because she's really, really cold, so I'm not staying by the vessel, but they keep asking me to put the kiddie on board and I'm not willing to do that, over.
But with Border Force and lifeboats already offloading those they picked up at Dover and at Dungeness, or responding to other incidents, any response here will have to wait. GB News presenter Nigel Farage, who's been front and centre of efforts to cover this growing crisis, has seen boats set off in increasingly hazardous sea conditions. In a conversation which now seems prescient, he warned it would only be a matter of time before a significant tragedy in these waters.
These people took off from a French beach. The wind would have been straight on the shore. There would have been a little bit of a surf running. They would have taken water from the moment they left the beach. They must be, I mean, I'm not warm and it's damp and it's, they must be very, very cold. And I would think, a lot of people dying of hypothermia is a real risk.
A Coast Guard helicopter assessed the scene an hour and a half after we first reported this migrant vessel, before the Dover lifeboat arrived shortly after that. The Home Secretary says the small boats crisis is a top priority for her department. But those who fished these waters all their working lives say the people traffickers won't be put out of business until the UK government gets tough.
No, it's definitely getting worse. I've seen it progressively get worse over the last 12 months. If they don't reach the English soil and then they're put on a processing island, or for a word, I suppose, there's no incentive for them to come to England, is there?
As we left those on board this inflatable to be picked up by the Dover lifeboat and headed back to port, more calls on the radio, more sightings of other small boats. And of course the tragic events near Calais, which will place extreme pressure on both the British and French authorities. Mark White, GB News in the English Channel. And it's quite remarkable to think that even at this time now, after 8 o'clock in the evening, those rescue operations are still continuing in the Channel, with this latest incident at Sandetti Bank, reports of people in the water. At the very least, even if there are no migrants in the water, it is another migrant boat trying to make this crossing many hours after they first began in darkness when we took to the Channel early this morning, Colin. Now, the Prime Minister, in holding that Cobra meeting today, admits clearly in all but name that this is a national emergency. Now, he's hoping that the French will be a bit more malleable, a bit more compliant in terms of allowing British border force officers and other personnel onto their beaches to help in the efforts to stop these boats launching in the first place. It's, I guess, in the French court now in terms of what they will do, but they will be under immense pressure as well. Make no mistake, that boat left their shore relatively easily today, as many others did, and got into difficulty on their side of the Channel with such a tragic loss of life.
Mark, thanks for your work today. Mark White there in Dover. Well, we're joined now by immigration lawyer Ivan Sampson. Ivan Sampson, thanks for joining us this evening. I know you've got to disappear fairly shortly, so we'll keep this brief, but we do appreciate your time. Let's start with the obvious point that has to be made, that this is a hideous human tragedy for in excess of 30 people today, and to a very great degree, these are victims of a system that's perpetuated by illegal people smugglers. Where do you feel that blame should lie?
Well, I heard Boris Johnson's interview on the television today, his disingenuous words of sympathy to the migrant, the people who died today tragically, to their family members. I think much of the policies of the UK government have led to the situation that we have today. You won't catch the smugglers completely. You can't police the coastline of France. It's a practical impossibility. So the UK government has to get into partnership with the French government to effectively patrol the waters, but also have a mechanism by which these migrants can first be returned to France if they've claimed asylum there or another country. Because at the moment, there is no agreement between France and the UK to repatriate asylum seekers who've claimed asylum elsewhere. The asylum seekers are aware of that. And there's a window of opportunity where they just need to get here. Priti Patel, I don't know, she's sitting on her hands on this point, but she has to get into partnership with the French and have a bilateral agreement for, firstly, to repatriate those that have claimed asylum.
Yeah, I'm just going to stop you for a second. There's a couple of charges there. The one about Priti Patel sitting on her hands. I mean, we know how difficult it's been for HMG, for Her Majesty's government, to get anything going with the French. There's been a reluctance, it would appear, from the Elysee Palace to get involved in talks with the British. So, it's easy for us to say more ought to have been done. This is a Home Secretary whose officials have drafted a new borders bill, who sought to reach out to the French and offer financial support to have things like aircraft flying over, extra British police on the beaches of France. And for whatever reason, there appears to be a reluctance on the part of the French to collaborate meaningfully with their British counterparts. And that's not Priti Patel's fault. She's tried what she can, and throughout she's warned that what's happened today would happen.
It's in both states' interest to resolve this problem. You won't resolve it through effective border control. The migrants will keep on coming. It will not stop. And the reason is they've gone from the lorries to the boats. In actual fact, the numbers have come down since last year, the number of people claiming asylum in the UK. The difference is that we can see them coming across the channel, whereas before in the backs of lorries, we didn't know who was coming over. That's the difference. But no, look, the Refugee Convention is not fit for purpose. You have to physically be in a country to claim asylum. It has no obligation on a refugee to claim asylum in the first country they come to. And also, we don't know who these people are. I mean, if I was Taliban, I'd be sending people across now. A great time to send people over. So there needs to be a system of vetting. And at the time the convention was written in 51, we lived in a different world. And so my view is we need to have a UK domestic law to deal with refugees. We need to come out that convention because it doesn't work. This will be resolved through diplomatic partnership with the French, and that's what's going to happen in the end.
Ivan, should the fundamental principle, however, not be one that will ultimately save lives, which is to send out the strongest possible signal of deterrence? If you want to try and come to this country illegally, you will find it very difficult. You may even find it counterproductive. And I know people scoff at the schemes that come from the wilder shores of the Home Office, the idea of let's have a third-party processing camp in Albania, perhaps in some Central African republic, or we're going to use jet skis to turn back some of the boats mid-channel. How would that work without risking a loss of life and then legal action against the people on the jet skis? But nobody can accuse this government of not understanding that fundamental principle that actually if you make it easier for people to try and make their way illegal to this country, you will simply get more and more people seeing that as the way you get into the country. More of them will risk their lives, and in so doing, more of them will perish.
No, I agree. There is a pull factor. I accept that. But look, can I just correct you, first of all? There's no such thing as illegal entry if you're claiming asylum. It's perfectly legal. In fact, you can enter the UK with a false passport and claim asylum. The Refugee Convention allows individuals to do that. I'm all against illegal entry. I'm absolutely, it's wrong. We should deter people coming illegally. But what we're doing is we're sending a message saying, don't come to this country to claim asylum. That's the message we're sending out to the world. That's not the principles upon which the UK was built. We want to accept genuine refugees. And if you look at the numbers, Germany accepted 100,000 last year. Do you know how many we accepted?
It was considerably smaller than that, for sure.
26,000. Yeah. And of the 13 million refugee children, we accepted 3,000. So,
but Ivan, for this,
the numbers
to fly, but for this to fly, I mean, I know it's immigration lawyers and NGOs and charities will take a position on this, and it's of course absolutely as is your right. But you'll know every single poll on this when it comes to asking the question of the general public whether they want to see this happening. And as you say, it may be because it's so much more visible than it was before. But they have strong opinions on this. And, in a country, in a democratic society where we frame the way we behave by consent, there is no consent for the largesse towards immigrants of whatever stamp you're talking about.
I agree. Look, the public don't decide whether this country should abide by the law, first of all. So if we're members of a convention, we have a legal duty to abide by the terms of that convention. So despite what the public thinks, we have an obligation to these asylum seekers. And if we don't like it, let's come out. It will never happen because you're going to send a message out to the world that we lack the compassion to people who are genuinely fleeing persecution. As I said, we need to have a mechanism why they can claim asylum outside the country. And there should be posts around the world where people can go to, and a fair distribution of those seeking asylum. I agree with you. The Refugee Convention doesn't say you've got to claim asylum in the first country you enter as well. It's a misnomer. They can claim in any country they like. Again, I don't think that's right. I think they should claim in the first country. And once they've made the claim, that person should be distributed fairly around the West. The West holds a fraction of refugees compared to, say, Pakistan, who's got millions, Lebanon. These countries are inundated with asylum seekers. We hold a small proportion of that.
Ivan Sampson, we've got to leave it there, but appreciate your thoughts this evening. Thanks ever so much.
It's a pleasure.
Let's turn to the Conservative councillor, Claire Purcell, who's a former special advisor at the Home Office for the one of the immigration ministers there. Claire, thanks so much for joining us this evening. Appreciate your time. Your thoughts today?
This is just a hideous, hideous situation. And sadly, it was inevitable that it would happen. We know that the Channel is not the greatest place to cross in a boat. But sadly, the traffickers, and I think you're quite right, that our vitriol needs to be at the organised crime gangs and the people traffickers who are selling this as the dream to people whose lives are in danger. And I don't understand why everybody is now blaming the British. Now, the British government have made mistakes. That is widely known. But the French need to play their part in this. Everybody needs to look at what has happened with French police being photographed watching boats launch from their beaches and standing by doing nothing. That isn't right. But to go back to people traffickers, we need to be dealing with those organised crime gangs with much tougher sentences, and actually with the whole of Europe and the rest of the world getting involved to highlight who these people are. Because until we do, this isn't going to stop.
I'm just reading, Claire, some of the tweets from the NGOs who, I want to be careful about what I say here, because, I mean, these are people who work for these NGOs and charities who feel and care deeply about the cause that they've been drawn to. A lot of these jobs don't pay particularly well. They just feel very strongly that a Western developed nation ought to be as welcoming to people who may be asylum seekers or legitimate asylum seekers as they possibly can. I just wonder, however, whether there is a sense today in particular and tomorrow when we pick up our newspapers, that at this most emotive of times, there will be people who will weaponise what's happened for ideological advantage. I mean, I see the tweet from Care for Calais, for instance. On behalf of those who have died, we again urge the government to scrap its anti-refugee bill and introduce a fair, modern system now. I mean, apart from the fact that these are campaigners who are speaking on behalf of those who have died, which is quite a leap, they're also describing the government's borders bill as an anti-refugee bill. And I dare say you would say it's not. It's something that actually seeks to recognise genuine asylum seekers where they exist.
Well, that's right. And, I think we need to step back a little bit and work out who are legitimate asylum seekers. The problems that we have is when people turn up at our shores, they don't have documentation. And since Brexit, we have lost the access to those tools that will allow us to identify people through fingerprints, through DNA, things like that. So we don't know who they are. We need to get back into those schemes so that we can understand who we've got that has turned up. Have they claimed asylum in a different country? And if so, then we need to return them. But until that is in place, we can't do it. Returns are also extremely difficult. Now that we are out of the European Union, we need to renegotiate deals with 27 member states individually. Now, I know nobody likes this answer, but that does have to happen. I know Priti Patel has worked hard on this, and the officials at the Home Office also have, but pressure now needs to be put on Macron to make these agreements happen, especially the ones with France. There has been a lot of pushback. I do appreciate they've got elections coming up next year, but now is not the time to play politics. When you see things like this that have happened, 5 women and a small girl have died. I think the French need to take some responsibility.
That's where this goes, because, I mean, hitherto it's been an abstract idea, hasn't it? I think we talked a week or two ago, Claire, and that old cliche, maybe I used it, maybe you used it, that idea that actually soon people will die. It's a dangerous crossing, busiest shipping lanes in the world, etc., etc. But actually, until today, that was just, a cliche. It was just a banality, wasn't it? But today, it's not abstract, it's real. They are pulling bodies, dozens of bodies, out of the Channel today. We've been warning about it for years. What does it change? And as you suggest, it's the French who are going to need to really make the pace on this, make the running on this. But there will be a lot of pressure on Priti Patel, on the Home Office, and on Boris Johnson too.
There will, and that pressure needs to happen. And it's all very well for everyone to say we're going to have bilateral talks, we're going to be tough, we're going to make decisions. Well, okay, we need to make those decisions. We now need to come up with the details that is going to stop this. And that needs to happen really quickly, not in 6 months' time, not in the spring. This needs to happen now. So that should happen from today's event. Over the next few weeks, those discussions need to take place and actions need to be forthcoming. Nobody has got a solution. It is an incredibly difficult problem. I know that. I have stood on a beach in January, the end of January in 2019, at 11:30 at night in Calais, looking across at Dover. It looks so tantalisingly close. I understand why people think it's within their reach, but they forget these are shipping lanes, the water is freezing cold, especially at this time of year, and the conditions are not good for crossing. But until we deal with returns, with traffickers, and actually get tough and make some detailed policy around this, it isn't going to change. And sadly, I think this will happen again.
Claire, I mean, as you stood on that beach looking across the channel towards the twinkling lights of Dover, I mean, the idea that you would have thousands of people crossing in November, late November, would have been unconscionable not so very long ago. But we may get towards 30,000 this year. Who knows where the projections take us? It's gone up, it's tripled this year. If it triples again, we'll be pushing anything up towards 100,000 next year. And what we don't know, I suppose, is to what extent the news of the tragedy today filters back down through those illegal trafficking networks, through Europe, through Turkey and beyond. And actually, there may be some people today in parts of Iraq or Syria or Bangladesh or Eritrea, wherever people are coming from, and they'll look at these pictures on international news networks and online and elsewhere and think, that's the risk. There really is a risk trying to get to Britain.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I don't think it will deter those. If you're coming from Afghanistan, where you are Hazara nationality, and you are looking at being murdered by the Taliban, your children taken away, you know, your husband shot in the street and or hung in the street, as an example, then any risk has got to be better than that. It's such a sad situation. I have seen refugee camps. I have stood on the beaches of Dover and Calais and looked across. There aren't any answers to this, but these poor people are victims of traffickers, and we shouldn't be blaming them for trying to cross when all they're doing is what we all want, a much better life.
Yeah, I can't help feeling that the way to really get this sorted out is to process asylum seekers in the closest possible country. If they're in Afghanistan, do the processing in Pakistan, and that way we triage them. We decide who's a legitimate case for asylum there in the country. And we don't have that situation where, you know, it's young, fit men, just by dint of being young, fit men and able to withstand this long journey, who are the ones who make it here, and the weak and the lame and the halt. And the ones who can't travel very far are the ones most deserving of asylum, and they can't leave the next neighbouring country. That's a conversation maybe for another time. Claire Purcell, thanks so much for yours this evening. Thanks very much. After the break, we'll talk to a former international rugby player who was diagnosed with early onset dementia when he was just 40 years of age.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark.
Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, girls at a primary school are said to have been groomed by a gang in Hull who are still at large. The city is the latest, I'm afraid, to add its name to a lengthening list of locations where the sexual abuse of girls has been going on for years. One victim claimed she'd been raped by some 150 men over a 3-year-long period, predominantly in blocks of flats or hotels on Humberside. Well, I'm joined by former Detective Constable Maggie Oliver, whistleblower who exposed the poor handling of the, well, that's putting it mildly, the poor handling of the Rochdale child sex abuse ring case by her own force in Lancashire. Maggie, thanks so much for joining us. Your thoughts on what's been happening in Hull?
It makes me very angry personally that we keep going round and round this same rabbit hole. But on behalf of the victims who are caught up in this case again, it fills me with despair, really, that they need to come to an organisation like the Maggie Oliver Foundation in order to be supported in their battle to be heard. We were approached well over a year ago, initially by one of the victims in this case. We're now aware of 7. And they have been seeing this case on the verge of being dropped for a while. But we've supported them and we've tried to get their voices heard by Humberside Police without any joy. We approached Operation Hydrant, but we've seen lots of evidence, and I believe that other independent experts have now viewed the evidence. We feel that there's a lot of corroboration for these victims. They were children, very, very young children, and when the authorities are dismissing them and fobbing them off, it's a sadly familiar story to me, Colin. Even with Op Augusta, which I worked on in 2005, for 15 years, Greater Manchester Police insisted that there was no evidence of abuse of those children. It took 15 years and a lot of energy and a lot of fighting to get GMP to be forced to reopen that case. And, these are cases that we see time and time again. Even right now, we've got, the MP for Keighley, Robbie Moore. He's trying to get cases in and around Keighley looked at. We've got all the publicity in the media about Rotherham. They are very, I accept that they are very difficult cases to investigate. But when you consider that there are less than 2% of cases of rape again or abuse against women and girls, that even reported cases that make it to court, you have to question whether the authorities are only taking the absolutely easiest cases forward, and in that process are failing 98 out of every 100 victims. We see it repeatedly in the foundation. Virtually every day we're approached by another victim who tells us the same thing, that they're not being listened to, that they're being fobbed off, and we try and support them to be heard.
Maggie, we're not back where we started, are we, with this? I as a younger reporter at the Yorkshire Post, going to interview Anne Cryer, the Labour MP, years and years ago, when she championed the cause of these young victims, and she felt that, she was accused of racism because a lot of those involved in these grooming gangs of Pakistani heritage, and a lot of the coverage, even today, I noticed, doesn't mention that fact, as if it's no longer germane. I don't know whether it is or not, but it's undeniable back then that there was a feeling of sensitivity around policing and police operations and evidential gathering and all that stuff, that nobody wanted to be labelled racist. Surely we're not back there. We've moved on from there, haven't we?
You know what, Colin? My work every day and the work of all the staff team and all the ambassadors in the foundation, I would say that we've never moved forward from that. I feel a bit like a broken record. We have a different case every week. We've got GMP in special measures because they failed to record 80,000 complaints of victims of abuse and serious crime. We've got lack of public trust in the Met after all the recent cases. We've got the Rotherham case, which constantly comes into the news because that's the only town or city where a full review was done. We have ICSA, which failed to look at the northern towns and cities and the grooming gangs. And in the foundation, we're dealing with dozens and dozens of cases of victims being failed. I mean, last week, I know it's a different channel, but Channel 4 did the rape debate, and there were 40 victims in that room, each one of which was saying clearly that they were not being listened to, that they were being failed. So I would say that we haven't really moved on. And my fear is that the public will just switch off from this, that they will be sick and tired of hearing of yet another case and another child and another victim being let down. And we mustn't let that happen. We have to take action. And I want to see the authorities being held to account when it becomes clear that they haven't investigated thoroughly and fully. With this case, I would argue that there is a lot of corroborating evidence. We've got, physical injuries. We've got pages and pages of school records detailing abuse. We've got diaries. These are very identical to the records that we had in Operation Span. And yet, from a total of well over 36 victims in Oxpan in Rochdale, we saw 3 victims have their cases taken to court. That is more than 35 that did not have their cases taken to court. And that is a repeating pattern. So I really feel despair sometimes, but I want every victim watching this or survivor who feels on their own to know that they're not on their own. If you come to the foundation, we will try to help you to be heard, because I think the hardest thing for a victim is to feel on their own, to feel isolated. It isn't always about a prosecution that makes it easier for a victim to recover and move on with their lives. Sometimes it is being believed, it's being supported, it's knowing that there is somebody out there who will fight their corner with them. And that's what we're doing, not only with the girls in Hull, but with victims and survivors all around the country. So that's the message I'd like to give. And I hope that the publicity around this case will mean that Humberside Police do look more closely at this case again.
Maggie Oliver, as ever, thanks for your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Now, over here, thank you. More claims today that the repeated heavy collisions of rugby can sometimes leave players with long-lasting neurological problems. This was a study of former professional rugby players which found they were more likely to suffer mental health problems than other sportsmen because of the number of concussive injuries they sustained during the course of their careers. Professionals who'd suffered 5 or more concussions were anything up to twice as likely to display symptoms of depression, including irritability, anxiety and anger management. Well, joining me is the former Welsh international Alex Popham, who was, sad to say, diagnosed with early onset dementia at the age of 40. Is the co-founder of Head for Change. That's the charity that supports former sportsmen who are affected by these neurodegenerative diseases. Alex, thanks so much for your time today. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks for having me.
I think one thing that might strike a lot of people from the study that we're talking about now is just 5 concussive injuries. And for anybody who's played rugby, I mean, it will not sound a particularly high number.
No, not at all. You could get that in a month, and that's the problem here. When I was playing, we had no education around concussion. Things have improved. Things have got better, and what we're doing as a lobby group that I'm involved with, Progressive Rugby, is looking at the areas that can make the game safer. And the majority of the stuff we want to do is off the pitch, away from the game on a Saturday.
Alex, we'll get into what the professionals can do in a second, but for parents whose kids play rugby, who are thinking about whether, if they've got should little Johnny do rugby, should he play tennis, should Susie do swimming or play rugby, is that a choice to be made? Should parents be worried about their children?
I think as long as the people who are looking after them, the coaches, the school teachers, educate the children to take it seriously. If in doubt, sit out. And I think as a parent, you've got to be asking those questions and err on the side of caution. If they take a knock, not push them back into the game. Allow that brain to recover.
Today is the 215th, it's 215 years ago since the birth of William Webb Ellis, founder of rugby. We can call him the founder of rugby, can't we? I just wonder whether the fundamental principles of rugby might be wrong, especially as the hits get bigger, the bodies get heavier, the contacts and the collisions just involve so much, in terms of the physics of the thing, so much energy brought to bear, and whether professional rugby just needs some wholesale rule changes to stop some of those massive hits now.
Well, it used to be a game of evasion with contact. Now it's become a game of contact with some evasion. And I think they need to definitely look at the rules, potentially allowing subs only to be used in an injury. So that means all 15 players would have to last the 80 minutes and be fit enough to last the 80 minutes. That would make the players in general smaller, so the collisions over the full 80 wouldn't be as big. But that is a study that needs to be looked at. It's not going to be an overnight decision that will be made. There's things that can happen tomorrow that would make the game a lot safer. And as I've said before, the majority of that is during the week.
It's interesting. I quite like the idea. I think a lot of people would support the idea of doing away with those massive substitutions that are played tactically by the coaches, but actually just mean that everybody's really fresh and ready to keep banging into each other. I just wonder, Alex, did you have any regrets about taking up the game? Because it's important when we have conversations like this to recognise that it is a wonderful sport. It does impart the most fantastic aptitudes to young men and women.
Oh, definitely. And I still love rugby. I just a part of this to make the game safer. Most of my friendship group are from rugby. I travel the world and have got and had some amazing experience with rugby. There's just simple things that need to be put in place to make this game we all love. I was at the game on Saturday with Wales, Australia, and supporting my Wales on. And I want that to continue. It is a special sport.
It really is. Alex Popham, and you were fortunate to play at the highest level. And thanks so much for joining us this evening. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
After the break, we'll tell you about NASA's plans to crash a spacecraft into an asteroid.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Miserable show so far. Let's try and give you some inspiration, some hope for the entire species, because today saw the launch from Californian soil of a rocket that might one day usher in technology that could save our species from extinction. NASA's DART mission aims to test how easy or otherwise it is to stop a large space rock that is on a collision course with us. There was a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. It took the spacecraft into space to begin a journey that will take it into the path of an object called Dimorphos. Yes, I think that's right. And see whether its trajectory can be nudged, altered sufficiently to put it out of harm's way if it came to that. Well, Eric Berger is senior space editor at Ars Technica, who joins me from Houston in Texas. Eric, thanks so much for your time. Exciting day.
Yeah, it was a big day. You know, we don't do much as a species that's proactive. And in this case, we are taking steps that may one day protect us from incoming asteroids. So it's kind of nice.
Take us through the physics of the thing. I mean, is this about the mass of the I was going to call it a probe. It's not a probe. It's not there to probe anything. It's just presumably there to hit something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's basically a kinetic impactor. It's going to be about 500 kilograms. It's basically like shooting a little BB against a bowling ball. And it's only going to make a minor change in the trajectory of the asteroid, but we hope to be able to measure that change and then get a sense of, you know, if we nudge it a little bit out of orbit or its orbit, then, you know, we can do the same to, you know, future asteroids that are on a collision course with Earth. These two asteroids, it's a binary asteroid, of course. They're not on the way to Earth, and we're not going to nudge them into Earth's path. It's just to demonstrate that, you know, a small spacecraft striking it can move it a little bit.
To nudge it even fractionally, but obviously over such large distances, that's enough to take it out of harm's way. How much warning do you need? I mean, is it days? Is it weeks? Is it longer?
It's a great question. It depends on how big the asteroid is, how close it is to Earth, and how fast it's moving toward the planet. The reality is to move any sizable asteroid, we probably at this point need years. And that's to prepare a mission and send it off into space. However, if this experiment works, you know, within 5 or 10 years, we could build a spacecraft, fill it with storable propellant, put it on orbit, and basically, you know, if we ever did find something that was threatening, send this spacecraft almost immediately, you know, out to impact it.
Yeah, I mean, when you run the sort of cost-benefit analysis, that's such a no-brainer, isn't it? Because the cost of that, of having a sort of something in orbit pretty much permanently on standby, a state of readiness to go and hurl itself at an approaching rock that could end all life on planet Earth, it's just such a no-brainer, and yet we may well not do it.
It's you know, NASA's planetary defense budget per year is $150 million. And, you know, in the United States, we spend $2.6 billion on candy for Halloween. So you would think that a small investment, you know, to mitigate against that kind of risk probably is warranted. Now, the odds that an asteroid, you know, big enough to cause sizable damage to planet Earth colliding with us in the next century, very low, but certainly non-zero.
Yeah, it feels like a golden opportunity for one of the great egos of the billionaire space race to do something that they could really spin in aggressive PR terms. I mean, an Elon Musk, you know, it's his Falcon 9 that took this thing into space today, or a Jeff Bezos. They could really say, given how much criticism there's been that, you know, you're just on giant ego trips, guys, they could fund something like this.
Yeah, I think this really is the province of national space agencies, perhaps even international space agencies. And the reason is, you know, let's say, you know, heaven forbid, one of these asteroids is coming toward Earth. You know, you would want a government behind that, you know, because if you're China and like Elon Musk is, you know, firing his spacecraft into the asteroid, are you like changing the trajectory from the United States to China? So, I mean, you really, you know, I think you really want a government backing at a mission like that.
Yeah, you make a very good point. Eric Berger, it's so good to talk to you. Really appreciate your time. Thanks ever so much.
My pleasure.
Well, if you are just turning on, let's just recap what's been happening in the Channel today. It's been a tragedy of very significant proportions. More than 30 people have drowned in the Channel today. And our home editor, Mark White, who spent the day in a boat on the Channel, is now in Dover telling us there are reports suggesting another lifeboat has been launched with more bodies in the water, potentially. It's something that's likely to feature very heavily in the newspapers tomorrow, that goes without saying, and very much likely to plant itself on politicians' agendas in coming hours and days as well. We've been running a poll. I'll share the details with you. Maybe we can throw it up now to give you a flavour of what you think about this. Public support for what some of the NGOs are saying in terms of this being the moment that we decide to be more liberal in our attitude towards border policy and asylum policy. Well, let me tell you, for instance, that about an hour ago, no more than that, I put the question to you, does today's tragedy in the Channel mean it's time to allow more migrants into Britain legally? 94% of you say, no, that is not where we should be heading off to right now. And just a flavour of some of the messages we've been getting. Kate says, no, this tragedy should mean more control of the Channel, not allowing more migrants as a sort of compensation. Lots of emails coming in. We'll try and go through them for you. Dan Wootton is next with this story and more.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good evening. A cold feel tomorrow, but generally a sunny day. Come Friday and Saturday, however, we're in for much livelier weather. Very strong winds